The desert seemed endless, but Layla no longer felt like the same girl who'd left Qamar village in the days since the Shadow Sultan's trap. She'd carried the shard not only in her hand, but in her heart. Its faint glow was a reminder of what she had done and what she still had to do. Malik walked beside her in silence as they crossed another ridge of windswept sand, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. He'd grown more cautious since the encounter at the ruins. The Sultan knows now, he murmured when they stopped to rest. And he's hunting us harder than before. You can feel it, can't you? Layla nodded. She could feel it in the quiet air, the heaviness pressing closer, the shadows in the corners of her vision that vanished when she turned her head. But she also felt something else. A spark, a quiet flame inside her that refused to go out, no matter how dark the desert seemed. That evening they stopped at the edge of a vast plain of black glass, cracked and jagged, shimmering faintly under the stars. This is the mirror field, Malik explained. What's left after the Sultan tried to burn the desert itself? Nothing lives here anymore except whispers. He crouched and touched the cool glass. We'll make camp here. The shadows won't cross it. Layla sat down beside him, her eyes following the cracks in the field as they disappeared into the darkness. After a long silence, she said, I've been thinking. Malik looked at her. I've been afraid since the night the stars fell, she admitted. Afraid of the voices I heard. Afraid of leaving home. Afraid of failing you. And everyone else who's counting on me. Her fingers tightened around the shard. But I think courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about walking forward anyway, isn't it? Malik didn't answer right away, but then he smiled faintly. A rare, soft thing that warmed his golden eyes. Yes, he said quietly, that's exactly what it is. She met his gaze. Then I'm not going to run anymore. Whatever he throws at me, I'll face it, even if it scares me, even if it hurts, because if I don't... She glanced out over the dark field, toward the distant dunes where faint red lightning crackled in the clouds. Then no one else will. Malik studied her a moment longer, then reached out and placed his hand over hers where she clutched the shard. Then you are truly the dreamer, he murmured. That night, as she drifted to sleep on the cold black glass, the voices in her dreams were no longer whispers of doubt. They were whispers of promise. We see you. We believe. You will not break. The next morning, Malik woke her. Early. The sands are shifting, he said as they packed their things. He's moving faster now. We'll have to go through the Valley of Ash if we want to reach the starfall before him. Layla swallowed. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine, but she only nodded. Then let's go. The Valley of Ash was worse than she could have imagined. The sands there were gray and heavy, sinking underfoot like wet clay. Blackened skeletons of palm trees jutted from the earth, their branches twisted and bare. A bitter wind howled constantly, carrying dust and whispers of things long dead. At the center of the valley lay a deep pit, glowing faint red from below. This was where he unleashed his worst magic, Malik explained quietly, where he broke the pact with the desert, his first act of defiance, and his greatest shame. Layla stared down into the pit. The glow grew brighter as she watched. And then she heard him, not just a whisper this time, but a voice, strong and clear, rising out of the pit. Dreamer, foolish little dreamer, come closer. Let me show you what courage costs. Layla staggered back, but Malik got her, steadying her shoulders. Don't listen, he said firmly, his voice calm despite the storm building around them. Don't give him even a moment. He wants to shake you. But Layla shook her head. No, she said, surprising even herself. Let him talk. I want to hear what he has to say. Malik stared at her, but didn't stop her as she stepped closer to the edge of the pit. The glow flared as she peered down into the darkness. a shape right there. Smoke and fire barely contained Dot so brave now, the Sultan hissed. But what happens when you're alone? What happens when he fails you? When your courage turns to ash, just like this valley? Layla closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, whispering bedtime stories in their little house. She thought of her father, smiling through his quiet sadness. She thought of Qamar village, of Malik, of the desert itself humming in her ears. And she opened her eyes again. I'm not alone, she said simply. The smoke below howled in fury, but dimmed. Malik's hand touched her shoulder. When she turned, he was smiling faintly. You've already won more than he knows, he said. They left the valley of ash together, walking into the wind, and Layla's heart felt light, because she knew now that courage wasn't something you were born with. Dot, it was something you chose, and she would keep choosing it. Dot, every single step of the way. The battle began before the sun rose. The heart of the desert, the starfall, was a vast circle of silver sand, shimmering faintly under the last stars of night. At its center, half buried and cracked, lay the final shard, the largest of them all, a brilliant spire of crystal glowing with the light of 1,000 suns. Layla and Malik reached the starfall just as the winds began to howl. The Shadow Sultan was waiting. He rose from the sands like a storm, his black form towering, his bronze mask gleaming in the moonlight. Smoke poured from his limbs, twisting into the shapes of beasts with claws and wings. Well done, little dreamer, he hissed, his voice shaking the very ground. You brought all the shards together just for me. Layla stood tall, clutching the 3 shards she carried, their glow almost blinding now. You'll never have them, she said. The Sultan laughed, a hollow, cruel sound. You think courage will save you? He sneered. You think this cursed jinn at your side will save you? He is nothing but my shadow, my servant, still bound to me. Layla's eyes darted to Malik, but he didn't flinch. I was your servant, he said coldly, stepping forward, his golden eyes blazing, until she freed me. You will never find me again. The Sultan roared and struck. The air exploded into fire and smoke. Layla raised her hands, and the shards blazed in unison, forming a wall of light around her and Malik. The desert itself seemed to awaken, sand swirling upward into shapes of stars and wings. You don't belong here anymore, Layla shouted over the roar of the storm. This is not your dessert. She stepped forward, each shard in her hands now burning hotter and hotter, their light pushing back his darkness. The Sultan screamed in fury, striking again and again. But this time, his blows shattered against her light, and then she reached the starfall. She placed all 3 shards into the cracked spire. The earth shook. The spire blazed with a brilliance so bright it turned night into day. The Sultan shrieked as his form cracked, splintered, and finally broke apart in 2. Dust. For the first time in centuries, silence fell. Malik dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. The golden glow around him pulsed brighter, then settled into something soft and warm. Layla turned to him, her chest still heaving, her arms trembling. Malik, she whispered. He looked up at her and smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. A real, unguarded smile full of quiet joy. I'm free, he said softly, as though tasting the words for the first time. His chains were gone. The faint black marks that had once curled around his wrists and neck faded to nothing. He stood and took her hands gently in his. Did it, he said. You broke his hold, not just on me, on all of us. Around them, the desert sang. The wains whispered with gratitude. The sands shimmered like stars. The horizon began to glow gold as the first light of dawn crept upward. A new dawn. Layla stood there, hand in hand with Malik, and watched the sun rise over the dunes. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, But she knew this much. She had faced the darkness, and she had not broken, and she would keep walking. Malik glanced down at her, his smile still faint but warmer than the desert sun. "Where to now, dreamer?" He asked out. She smiled back. "Wherever the stars take us." And together they walked into the light of a new day. Epilogue. The dreamer's legacy. The stars above Qamar village glowed brighter than she remembered when Layla crossed back over the familiar dunes and the rooftops of her little home came into view. It felt as though years had passed since she'd left, though it had been only weeks. The night she had fled into the desert, she'd been scared, unsure, burdened by whispers she didn't understand. Now she was someone else entirely. The villagers stared as she walked through the square, some in awe, some whispering, some just watching in silence. No one had seen her since the night of the starfall. Many had assumed she'd never return, but here she was, and she carried herself like someone who belonged not just here, but to the whole of the desert itself. Her mother was the first to reach her. The woman's hands flew to her mouth, in shock as she saw Layla step into the courtyard. Sunburned, sand-streaked, but alive, her eyes brighter than ever before. "My daughter," her mother whispered, and then she was pulling Layla into her arms, weeping into her shoulder. Layla held her tight, closing her eyes and letting herself simply feel the warmth of home for the first time in what felt like forever. "I'm here," she murmured. "I'm home." Later that evening, after the tears and questions had faded and the house grew quiet, Layla sat on the roof alone. Desert stretched out before her, golden under the moonlight, endless, alive. The shard still hung around her neck, faintly glowing, as though even now it whispered to her. She didn't yet know what came next. She didn't know if she'd ever see Malik again, not in the way she had known him on their journey. When the Sultan fell and the curse was lifted, the jinn had become something different. Light and wind and fire, impossible to touch. She had watched him disappear into the starlit sands at dawn, his golden eyes soft as he said goodbye. But even then, his last words had stayed with her. "You'll never truly lose me, dreamer. Not while you carry the desert in your heart." That night, she lay in bed under the open window, staring up at the stars, and she dreamed. She dreamed of the desert, vast and alive, of stars falling and wings of light dot, and of Malik. He stood at the edge of her dreams, the same quiet smile on his lips, his golden eyes warm as firelight. "You still watch the stars," he said softly. She smiled in her sleep. "Always. Good," he murmured. "Because the desert still watches you." She reached out, and though she couldn't feel his hand, she felt his presence, steady and comforting, like the whisper of sand on the wind. "Will I see you again?" she asked quietly. Malik tilted his head, his smile faint but kind. "Already do," he said, "every time you close your eyes." When she woke at dawn, she felt lighter somehow. The shard glimmered faintly against her chest, and though her room was quiet, she could almost hear his laughter on the morning breeze. She rose and stepped to the window, watching the desert wake. Somewhere out there, 1,000 stories still waited to be told. Hers among them, and though no one in the village would ever truly understand what she'd seen, what she'd done, some quiet part of her knew her story would live on. It would live in the whispers of the dunes, in the sparkle of the stars above. Qamar, and in the hearts of those who still dared to dream. Because she had learned the greatest truth of all. Courage doesn't end when the journey is over. The dream doesn't die. When the dreamer wakes, it only changes shape, and it lives on. Untold story lives in the eyes of dreamers. To be continued.